Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Our day today is very rich in events, although it is not finished yet. At the moment, we have the information that the special battalions Azov, Dnipro, Donbass, and Shakhtarsk liberated 3 towns: Pervomaisk, Kamyshevacha, and Kalinova. Also, on the liberated territory, a group of special forces of Russian Federation and almost 30 terrorists were discovered and liquidated. Besides, the armed forces of Ukraine today liberated the town of Ugledar, where they raised the state banner of Ukraine. At the road checkpoint between Horlivka and Insinuator, a car with 3 terrorists was destroyed who transported a lot of explosives. In the city of Shastia, Battalion Aidar detained the mayor of Artemisк and another person who cooperated with terrorists. At the moment, they are helping with investigation. During the day, armed forces have 5 times exchanged fire with terrorists. And as a result of successful actions of the anti-terrorist operation forces, terrorists in the vicinity of Horlivka were cut off the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. The Ukrainian armed forces are preparing for further offensive in several directions. There were battles in some districts of Donetsk, Luhansk, Horlivsk, and also Ilovaisk. At the same time, Ukrainian Air Force and artillery neutralized a number of groups of terrorists in the vicinity of Shakhtarsk, Toretsk, and Snizhne. At the same time, in connection with the offensive of anti-terrorist operation forces, the conflict situations became more frequent between terrorists because they do not have enough weapons, ammunition, food, and communication. In the Donetsk region, militants from the Oplot, commanded by Tor, fired at the convoy of wounded fighters of the group People's Liberation Movement that is controlled by Field Commander Hrek. The situation on the Ukrainian-Russian border remains tense. At 11:15 a.m. for almost 1 hour, there was an exchange of fire between bodyguards and terrorists in the vicinity of Pobeda, Donetsk region. On the territory of self-proclaimed so-called Luhansk People's Republic, the order by Mr. Bolotov was enacted about the ban of leaving the territory to the Russian Federation of men between 16 and 60 years of age in connection with the mobilization on the territory of the so-called Republic. It is forecast that the same order will be very soon proclaimed on by the leaders of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. The terrorists are continuing to shell settlements, for instance, the city of Makiivka. In the block of flats Zeleny in Makiivka, the terrorists are taking people hostages, and at the moment they are holding 34 people, from whom they demand 300,000 hryvnia for liberation. Because of the deterioration of water supply in Luhansk, a real threat of infectious diseases appeared in Luhansk. There's no electricity in the city, which does not give a possibility to preserve food in refrigerators. So there's a danger of the inflagration of food toxic infections. And today, the displaced persons from settlements where there are active combat actions, they are getting humanitarian aid transferred to them by the National Guards of Ukraine in the Center for Refugees in Mariupol. The people there got some food and other necessary things. At the same time, on the territories controlled by militants, the criminal situation is becoming worse. There's a lot of looting on the part of terrorists who use their illegal right to check documents. They check the flats. They declare a possible firing, and they confiscate any valuables from people. Quite a lot of militants consider that the leadership of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic betrayed them and abandoned them. Besides, there's a problem of non-payment to them of the promised money. There is also mass desertment, and they do not obey the orders during combat actions. There are subversive groups on the liberated territories, and there are cases of firing at road checkpoints of the anti-terrorist operation from civil transportation. The Minister for Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Linas Linkevičius, said that the international community cannot trust Russia, who informed on the sending of 280 lorries with this so-called humanitarian aid. He said that Ukraine experiences difficulties because of the terrorists, and the help should be provided exclusively in the way that is acceptable for Ukraine. The diplomat said that European community cannot trust any statements from Russia, and reminded of how the armored trucks were repainted in blue, in white, and were waiting to cross the border. According to the words of Linas Linkevičius, everything that is happening in Ukraine has to be done with the know and with the agreement of Ukrainian authorities. As the Ministry for Social Policy informs, 16,000 hygienic sets of the first necessity is to be transferred as a humanitarian help, charity help to internally displaced person. The help will be provided by the Population Foundation of the UN, according to the previously reached agreement. Any
doesn't work out. That's why that's okay.
Okay, I just wanted to know if there were any developments this afternoon in terms of the discussions with the Russian side about the aid that is coming to Ukraine.
Продовження інформації з нашого ранкового брифінгу. Чи є якась нова інформація щодо переговорів з Росією по гуманітарній допомозі від Росії?
Thank you for question.
To continue the issue from this morning, the coordination of gathering and receiving the humanitarian aid was undertaken by the Red Cross. The Red Cross will receive humanitarian aid on the border. There will be customs procedures in a special neutral zone, and as soon as this aid arrives, it will be reloaded to lorries hired by the Red Cross, and then they will be delivered to eastern parts of Ukraine, Luhansk in particular. The security of the convoy will be provided by the Ukrainian military.
Which border crossing? And is this something that you've agreed on with Russia?
На якому пункті пропуску буде ця
Попередня
Preliminarily, it is Kharkiv region, and the crossing point we will tell you a bit later. And we haven't defined the crossing point yet, but we can definitely say that this is going to be in Kharkiv region. Any other questions? How the movement of the convoy with the humanitarian aid through the territory of Ukraine will influence the anti-terrorist operation. The anti-terrorist operation will continue in spite of how the humanitarian aid will move, although we will use all the means to provide for security of the movement of this convoy. And another question. Is there any new information on Shakhtarsk? What's happening there? The towns that are liberated I have already named. In the vicinity of Shakhtarsk, there is an offensive of Ukrainian armed forces. The grouping of terrorists is being blocked. The day is still not ended. Tomorrow we will tell you about the final result of the actions. What about the situation in Krasny Luch? Because today there was an anti-terrorist operation scheduled because the terrorists banned the residents from leaving the city. Were there active combat actions? What's the situation with water and else? And where can we see the list of residents who died or who are in dire straits? The city of Krasny Luch is within the sights of the anti-terrorist operation. It will be liberated. As far as the calculation of the victims among the local residents is concerned, we don't have this information because they are on the territory temporarily controlled by the terrorists. As soon as the city is freed, all the necessary help will be provided, as this happened in Kramatorsk and other liberated cities. At the moment, we cannot provide you a detailed information about Krasny Luch. Is there a possibility that the convoy will cross the border on the part of the border not controlled by Ukrainian border guards? Over the last week, Ukraine twice was under the threat of direct military intrusion. The president of Ukraine managed to localize this danger due to diplomatic and political channels of his communications with European Union leaders and the USA. In this way, we have all the prerequisites for this convoy to move to the point that will be defined, designated by the Red Cross representatives. These prerequisites are here, and at the moment there's work on collecting humanitarian aid, and this applies to this convoy that will arrive at the point of gathering this aid. Could you please tell me about the list of the dead and those who suffered, how the relatives of people who are dead and relatives of people who are in the zone of anti-terrorist operation can get to know who suffered, who was killed. Is there any such place that we can address? You can get this information in the bodies of local self-government, in the cities and towns which are liberated from terrorists. Where the terrorists are, you cannot get the information because the data provided by the terrorists is, as a rule, not true. Let's wait until all the settlements are freed.
One more time about Russia. I'm just trying to understand if there's any change that's happened today in which there are discussions that have taken place that have assured you that the Russian authorities are willing to hand over this aid to the Red Cross for it to be transported not by the Russian convoy on Ukrainian territory. Has anything changed today in your understanding with the Russian authorities?
Чи щось змінилося, чи є у вас все-таки розуміння того, що Росія добровільно з найкращими намірами надає цю допомогу гуманітарну? Чи є якась нова інформація, відмінна від тої, яку повідомляли вже сьогодні зранку?
Дякую за запитання.
I have to explain that Russia is a donor of the International Committee of Red Cross. This is why its humanitarian cargo will be taken into account by the experts of the Red Cross, who will be responsible for the collection of the entire humanitarian cargo, and it will be transported through the territory of Ukraine by the transport that will be provided by Ukrainian authorities.
Чи відбувається діалог сьогодні, чи відбувався саме діалог сьогодні з російською стороною щодо цього вантажу?
Дякую за запитання.
As far as this cargo is concerned, I emphasize that the main party responsible for the collection, for the designation of the quantity of the cargo, is the Red Cross organization, who are fully responsible for collecting the cargo from the donors, and they are responsible for transporting it. Ukrainian authorities and the Ukrainian military are responsible for providing the security for this convoy on the territory of Ukraine. Still, are there any talks with the between Ukrainian and Russian authorities? The intermediary and the main party responsible is Red Cross, and it is they who are talking to every party. All the dialogue runs through the Red Cross. The last report from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Russia is several minutes ago, is that they say that the issue of the route was already agreed with the Ukrainian side. They say so. How can you comment on this? I cannot comment on this. We didn't have any agreement that this convoy will talk to us. As you know, Mr. Putin yesterday informed Mr. Barroso that they have sent a cargo on a convoy to the side in the direction of Ukraine. However, the Red Cross did not know anything about this. Nothing was agreed with Red Cross or Ukrainian side. However, we do not reject humanitarian aid from Russia, which is a donor of International Red Cross. This means that there was no I must emphasize that the initiative was on the side of our president of the part of the president, because he initiated the creation of international humanitarian mission under the auspices of International Red Cross. And this was agreed with Mr. Barroso, who promised to allocate 2.5 million euro from the European Union, and Russia decided to join the humanitarian mission. Any other questions? No questions. Thank you. We finish our working day. We'll see Mr. Lysenko tomorrow at 12:30 p.m.